This is Erin Rival and Karen Marie from Real Kids, Real Faith, and we are here talking today with Eugene Roehlkepartain, the senior scholar with the Search Institute, about a challenge that he's noticed between what adults say about children's important relationships and the kinds of relationships children actually need. Gene, could you tell us a little bit more about this challenge that you've identified?
Well, we worked with Frameworks Institute to ask adults. We keep hearing adults saying, yeah, relationships are really important, relationships really matter. And we keep hearing people saying that kids don't have enough relationships in their life. So we began probing to say, asking people on the streets, well, what kind of relationships do kids need? And what are your relationships with kids? And we found a couple of things is that adults really have a narrow definition of what the relationships kids need. And there's a couple things about that. They actually really only think kids need relationships with their parents when it comes down to it. And they define relationships very narrowly around, you just got to love them and then everything takes care of itself. And from our perspective, that really doesn't capture the depth and breadth of the kind of relationships young people need in their lives. So that's a big aha that we've got to work on.
Yeah, that does sound like kind of a big aha. So what are some of the specific issues that you've noticed in relation to this challenge? What's the problem with thinking that just parents matter and that and not really having relationships that are more than just caring?
So first of all, parents do matter. I'll get that out there. They matter a lot. They are primary in lots of things. So don't get me wrong on that. However, I don't know, there's been a time in history when it's been only parents. And when we put all the burden on parents, first of all, it's really lousy for parents because the stress of that is overwhelming, and it's really bad for kids. We grow up best when we have lots of people around us looking out for us, and it's bad for churches because how do you we now have models in churches where they're relying on parents to do all of the recruitment for doing everything with kids. So you got that issues as burnout. So we've basically turned a aberration of the family in some ways, a small, tiny nuclear family, into doing everything for kids for 20 years or more. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't, it's really hard to do that. And kids don't benefit from that. Kids need to have a whole cloud of witnesses around them in real life, actually, who are there looking out for them, nurturing them, aunts and uncles and neighbors and everybody who say, yeah, I got your back. And yet right now, the model is a very small number of people, one or two parents have that whole thing going on, and other people don't feel like they have permission to say anything to those kids. There's sort of this very, very, very narrow understanding of who's responsible and who's to blame. And so now we're getting to the things where parents are blamed for anything that goes wrong because they're solely responsible for everything. And that's a really vicious cycle. And it's really bad for the kids because they're not getting the range of those positive influences and supports that they need. So to me, there's lots of reasons to be concerned about that. That go far beyond, no, it's not just parents' fault, so there's that. And the other piece is around, yes, it's love. And if you think deeply about love has many dimensions, but most of us think of it fairly superficially in terms of it's just this one nice feeling. And so people just don't actually dig deeper into the breadth and depth of what a relationship really is. And so that's really where one of the things we're doing at Search Institute is we sort of started breaking down is what do kids need in their relationships around, yeah, they need love and they need challenge and they need support and they need people who are there to expand possibilities for them, to open up the new worlds for them. They need people who share power with them to give them a sense of autonomy and development. All of these other things are what happen in our relationships that are part of what help us grow and learn and thrive. And so if we just say, oh, we just love them to death and that's all, just we give them hugs and they're fine. Yes, they need hugs. They do need us to care for them and love them, and they need so much more. So I guess that's what worries me about when people say, oh, we just love them to death and it's just parents doing it. Kids don't have the wealth of experience and relationship that they really do need. So.
Yeah, can you tell me more about these relationships and what these relationships might look like?
Yeah. And that's really what we've been working on. We have a framework we call developmental relationships, and we try to break it down and make it tangible. And I kind of whip through that. But the idea here is that if you could be intentional about thinking about the kind of relationships you want to build with kids, then maybe we can get on the same page about that. So we talk about relationships having 5 dimensions, whether it's a parent relationship, a teacher relationship, a mentor relationship, a Sunday school teacher relationship, whatever it might be, where yes, you need to express care, where there's this mutuality of care, where you're listening, you're um, expressing appreciation, where there's warmth being exchanged, all of those kind of things that make you feel like someone cares for you. So that's one of the 5 dimensions. The next one we talk about is challenging growth, where you say, I want you to be your best. I want to push you to be your best. If something goes wrong, we're gonna learn from those mistakes so that you can continue to grow. So all of these dimensions of challenge, and in the parenting literature, you'll hear but echoes of bomb rhyme when you put challenge and growth, challenge and care together, where you've got to both challenge someone to push hard, but also then really support them and care for them as kind of the balance of those. So it's not just one by itself; it's the two, both and working together around an authoritative kind of parenting model. And then there's the support, which is more of a utilitarian. How do you help? How do you scaffold children so that they can learn to get things done, so they can reach goals? And so there's helping them with skills. It's around the advocacy to work in systems or to get through things so that they're not on their own trying to figure things out, but then stepping aside so they actually do learn the skills. So that's support. So those kind of ways of learning the balance of all of that. And then sharing power is in some ways, it's one that we love talking about the most because people freak out about, you're going to give up your power to your kids. And well, actually you end up in the long run, yeah, how do you transfer a sense of autonomy and responsibility and capacity to do things in the world, a capacity to take care of yourself even, but in the long run to make a difference in the world. So how do we learn over time to move from tying a kid's shoe to they're tying their own shoes, to think for them, to them coming up with ideas for themselves and beginning to make their way in the world. So that's sharing power, this transfer of power. And I often say every relationship has a power dynamic. So how do we make those healthy power dynamics? So that's the other piece of that. And then finally, the last piece of the framework is expand possibilities. It's through relationships that we are introduced often to our dreams. That's often what you hear mentors talk about. Is it through this person that I found my vocation? Is through this person that I never thought of playing the bassoon, and then I heard it from this person and they introduced it to me. Or you can just imagine all the different things. I never thought of philosophy, and then I got to know this professor and it just came alive. And so through these relationships that we discover the world beyond what we already knew, and it opens up to us. And so that's the fifth, around how do we expand possibilities for who we are, to find our calling, our voice, and our place in the world. So those 5 elements can happen in any relationship. And we would argue that most of the things you learn through relationships, and stuff sticks through relationships. So that can be a parent, it can be a friend, it can be a teacher, it can be anybody. And so yeah, so we're in the process of trying to understand those, contextualize those, and just think about how do we help people become more intentional about those and more inclusive about those. So we're not just doing those with the kids that are easiest to be with, but we're also inviting more and more kids to those kinds of relationships.
That's really exciting stuff. And I know from looking at some of your work on the Search Institute website that you have a sort of a great visual metaphor that you others have come up with to help parents and other adults think about these developmentally sound relationships with young people. So could you tell us a little bit about that metaphor?
Yeah, so this all sounds a little abstract or very abstract sometimes. And um, we came to we're coming to describe relationships as like roots. They're like roots in a tree. You don't actually see them, pay much attention to them sometimes. But without roots, a tree doesn't survive. And it's from roots that you begin, if you begin thinking about what does a root do for a plant, and you begin to recognize that that's the source of sustenance. In some cases, it's the source of stability. And then you go from there of beginning to understand that the roots we may not pay much attention to, but we don't live without them. And so how do we begin to understand that it's through our roots that we flourish, that we're resilient because of our roots. That often it's our roots that find what we need. There's actually roots that will go look for nutrients that we don't have and help us get those nutrients. Some roots are taproots that go deep, and other roots are, I don't know what they're called, but other kind of roots that go out wide. And there's all these different kinds of roots that we need. And so you begin to imagine that as a metaphor to thinking about relationships. And there's not just one kind of root that does one thing, but there's a variety of roots that we need. And so it's those kinds of things. And to begin to, I think it enriches our understanding of relationships to begin to use that as a metaphor to begin to open up the conversation. And to do that in a room with people, I once had a horticulturalist in a training where we said, what do you think about when you think about roots and relationships? And she went crazy, and it's great fun to do that, because it's, there's so much variety in how relationships can nurture different kinds of plants, and how that works. And that opens up possibilities as we think about how we how we nurture relationships, and how that works with different young people, and how they're reciprocal. That's the other thing about relationships. If you think about it, it's not one way, it's reciprocal. And so then that opens up a whole nother conversation about how we think about nurturing kids.
That's really cool. And especially for those of us here in the United States, or, North America, where spring is just coming into being, at least we're seeing signs of it. To think about roots and nurture is kind of an exciting way to imagine relationships.
Right.
So I really want to thank you, Gene, for taking a little bit of time to think about relationships and children with us. I know that you're continuing to do a lot of work in that area, and we're looking forward to talking with you again sometime about that additional work as it comes to fruition. Thanks again so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.